The United States diesel shortage going into the code red stage. Is it time to panic? I'm going to explain this to you in 3 simple, fast steps. And at the end of this video, you'll be able to draw your own conclusion as to whether you should just sit back and pretend that nothing's wrong, or you should start to prepare immediately. Step number 1, let's go over what the actual problem is. First and foremost, you have to understand diesel fuel is used in every single thing you buy. You can sit there and say to yourself, oh, George, you're just fear-mongering. Oh, this is clickbait nonsense. Really? Just try to think through a world where we didn't have any diesel. There would be nothing, literally nothing, transported. We wouldn't have heating oil in many of the parts of the country. And if the problem doesn't seem dire enough, you wouldn't have any food. None, nothing, unless you grow your own in the backyard. So when I sit there and say that if the United States runs out of diesel, it will be like a Mad Max movie. We're talking about a complete hellscape, like a zombie apocalypse. And if you don't believe me, editor, let's cut right to a clip from NPR.
What exactly is diesel, and why is it so important as an energy source?
Diesel is the fuel of the economy, and it's in just about everything that we use. The bulk of manufactured and retail goods move day and night on trucks and trains powered by the fuel, and manufacturing, farming, and heating also relies on diesel. And diesel is so deeply embedded in American life that its consumption is often seen as a barometer of the country's overall economic activity. Without it, the supply chains would collapse and things simply wouldn't work.
So let's go to a chart of diesel inventories and see just how bad the problem is. And throughout the rest of the video, we'll try to analyze what the cause is and what the end game will be. How will this play out? So this is a chart, like I said, of diesel inventories going back to 2020 all the way to October of 2022. On the left, we go from 20 days of inventory up to 55 days. So as you would imagine, during the cerveza sickness, the inventory spiked higher because demand went down so much. But since this time, we've really seen the inventories trend straight down. Now you get some big blips here, and we'll get into that in step number 2. That's really because some of the refiners shut down in the fall and in the spring for maintenance. But the main takeaway is it's declined rapidly to the point where we are today, where we only have 25 days of inventory left. The worst place we have been since 2008. And you may be saying to yourself, yeah, George, it's no big deal. I mean, hey, we were able to recover in 2008. Yeah, with a global financial crisis. And this time, it may be worse because the system itself and the reasons for the decline in the inventories are much, much different than they were in 2008. I'm going to reveal what these huge differences are throughout the rest of this video. Step number 2. So what's the cause of the problem? How did the United States get to the brink of this crisis situation? Well, as you would imagine, it starts with the central planners, the politicians, and the government making bad decisions. Let's go back to 2020, and a lot of the refiners went bust. These are the refiners that take the oil and turn it into the diesel we need to run the economy. And the central planners would lead you to believe that the reason they went bust was because of the cerveza sickness. Absolutely not. It was the policies implemented by the authoritarians themselves that led to all of the economic destruction we saw. It wasn't because of the cerveza sickness. It was because of the government policies. So the demand plummets And therefore, a lot of these refiners go bust. You remember when oil went to negative $38 a barrel. I believe that was April of 2020. This means that the refiners aren't making any money. Imagine that, when oil is actually negative and there's almost zero demand for gas or any of the products they produce. So the next thing that we have to look at is they haven't had any reinvestment, because now these refiners, the ones that are left, are absolutely printing money. Their margins have exploded higher, as you can imagine, with demand going back to where it was, but yet all of their competitors are pretty much out of business. So then the question becomes, okay, well, why aren't they taking all that profit and building into additional capacity? Why aren't they building more refineries for the ones that we lost back in 2020? Well, first of all, it takes a long time to build a refinery. It's not something that you just throw up in 6 months like you would a single family home. Secondly, if you owned a refinery, would you reinvest in more capacity when you have the government breathing down your neck, saying that we've got to do something about climate change? Or in California, they're saying we're not going to sell any gas cars in the future, only electric cars by 2035. And you've got the Great Reset agenda. You've got the Green New Deal. You've got Greta Thunberg, or whatever her name is.
How dare you?
Making the claim that we've got to rid ourselves of all fossil fuels. They're the devil, and they'll lead to our ultimate demise.
How dare you?
But isn't it ironic that the process of weaning ourselves off of fossil fuels, or the attempt to do so too early, is actually what is causing the demise of the United States and the West as we know it?
How dare you?
Everybody wants clean energy, renewable energy, and clean air. But the problem is if we go from A to B too quickly, and if we do it with a top-down approach instead of a bottom-up approach, there isn't going to be an economy or a society to benefit from the clean air derived from those renewable energy sources. In other words, all those windmills aren't going to do you any good if you're living in a cave and you have to forage for your food in a world that looks like the Mad Max movie. The third cause of our problem is the sanctions on Russia. Listen, I'm no fan of what Putin did, but the bottom line is you can't enact a policy that's going to hurt us more than it hurts Russia. It's like going into a fight and punching yourself in the face. So many people say, we've got to do something. We've got to do something. Right. Maybe we do. But doing something doesn't mean that we have to do something that's going to hurt us and not hurt them. This makes absolutely no sense. But again, it goes right back to the unintended, or maybe intended, consequences from the central planner's policies, just like we saw during the lockdowns of 2020. To illustrate these points further, let's go right to the internet and check out a clip from Bloomberg.
It is a huge problem. In fact, if you look across the commodity spectrum, we've been arguing there's commodities that are in a good situation, some that are in a bad situation, and some that are in an ugly situation. And diesel definitely qualifies as an ugly situation commodity because of three main reasons. Reason number one is that we've had a huge disinvestment in refining capacity because we had weak demand throughout the last couple of years during the pandemic, and then, of course, we were all moving quickly to an electric vehicle future that's maybe taking a little longer than we expected, as we've learned with Tesla. But so I think we've lost about 2 million barrels a day, 2% capacity on refining that is now coming back to haunt us. Second factor is the very, very high natural gas prices globally. Remember, high gas prices hurt refining margins because gas is a key input into the refining process. This is what we use to burn crude oil to create diesel. Essentially, that's gas. So that's not helped us either. And then the third factor, really on the supply side, which has been a big problem, is sanctions on Russia.
Now let's go to the whiteboard so we can go over a visual of exactly what they are talking about on the Bloomberg clip. This makes it very clear what is causing the problem we're facing right now. So we've got the United States right here, and this is, let's say, in 2019, prior to the cerveza sickness. And let's just say that we had 3 oil refineries. Now, we had a lot more than that, but just for this example. So this is an oil refinery, obviously, and they're producing a barrel of the diesel we need. And let's assume that the United States in aggregate total has demand for 6 of these barrels of diesel. Okay, well, the United States is producing 3, but we have to import diesel as well. Where? From Russia. So we produce 3 barrels, and then we import 3 barrels. That gives us the 6 we need. No problem. But fast forward to today. After all these bad policies, we now only have 1 refinery because 2 of them have gone bust, and we have no reinvestment in extra capacity because your drunk, insolvent Uncle Sam is talking about a world that he's going to force us into, whether we like it or not, where 100% of the vehicles are electric, we're using no fossil fuels, and we have a windfall profit tax. Again, if you're a refiner and you're making a little bit of money after you basically almost went bust in 2020 because of the government in the first place, and now they're talking about taxing you even more, are you going to take your profits and invest in additional capacity? Absolutely not. But then let's also remember that we've completely sanctioned Russia. So all of the diesel we were importing from them, now we're getting 0. So let's remember, we still have 6 barrels of demand. But now we're only producing 1 barrel, and we're getting 0 barrels from Russia. Therefore, what would you expect inventories to do? Decline further and further and further to the point where we're in a code red crisis. And these are the differences that make today's situation far dire than what we saw in 2008, the last time that we only had 25 days of inventory left for the diesel that is so crucial to our economy and our society. Step number 3, what is the end game? How will this play out? And maybe more importantly, is it time to panic? These are actually pretty easy questions to answer. The first option we have here to bring this supply-demand back down to an equilibrium to where we can manage it and bring our inventories back up is to have a GFC 2.0. What I mean by that is to have an economic collapse or an economic crisis. Now you say, George, well, that's not a very good solution. And I would agree. That's a very, very bad solution. But even the mainstream media is talking about this, how we won't get our inventories back up to a level above crisis or above emergency levels without having a substantial decrease in demand. What that means in normal person speak is we have to have an economic recession, an economic depression, so demand goes right back down to where it was during the cerveza sickness when everyone was in lockdown, and then we can gradually build up those inventories with the reduced amount of refining capacity we're now faced with in 2022. And this might be the most probable outcome. Look at the yield curve right now. Not only is the 2-year inverted with the 10-year, but now the 3-month Treasury is yielding a higher rate than the 10-year Treasury. A very ominous sign for not only the US economy, but the global economy. But we got to keep in mind that if we go into an economic recession, what this means is a lower standard of living. More on that in just a moment. So we could see this, we'll call it economic crisis, GFC 2.0, however you want to label it, where demand goes from those 6 barrels we talked about in step number 2 down to 3 barrels. Okay, well, how does that impact Europe? This is a very important question. Let's say for right now, they have a demand of 5 barrels, but they only have a supply of 4. So their prices are still going up. They're still in a very bad spot. And this would continue, in my opinion, even if we had an economic slowdown. But if we don't get that slowdown, then the inventories will continue to decrease till they get to the danger zone. That's going to mean prices go higher and higher and higher. Let's remember that diesel is settled in dollars. So this gives the United States a massive advantage. We can actually print the dollars we need to buy the diesel in case of an emergency situation. But remember, there's very limited capacity, not just in the United States, but globally. So if the price goes higher and higher and higher, yes, the United States can import more diesel, but that takes diesel away from other countries, other nations like Europe. So then they go into a scenario where their demand is still 5, but since we're sucking up all the diesel supply away from them, coming in from the UAE or wherever it's coming in from, then their supply actually goes to 1. And let's remember that energy is the economy. So if you have less energy, the inevitable outcome will be an economic decline and a lowering of the standard of living. But it's not just bad news for Europe. Because of the much higher prices, then we would see demand go down in the United States. Maybe not that much, because demand for diesel is very inelastic. But remember, any lowering of diesel usage, meaning a decrease in demand, will inevitably lower economic output. So yes, the higher prices would definitely affect Europe, along with many other countries who have to import that diesel, but don't have the ability to print the dollars needed to buy that diesel at any price. But let's remember, even in this scenario, the United States doesn't get out of this unscathed. So this equilibrium, the problem between supply and demand that we have with diesel right now, yes, it can get better if we have an economic crisis, if you want to look at it that way. But what's interesting is if we don't have an economic crisis that brings down demand, the price will go up and up and up, which will create an economic crisis in and of itself. So regardless of how this plays out, unfortunately, the net result is still the same. And that is an economic decline, to put it mildly, as a result of this diesel shortage, code red. So then the question becomes, is it time to panic? I don't know if I'd go that far, but it's definitely time to prepare. And if getting in a panic is what you need to motivate you to get out there and stock up on diesel, if you have a generator, or buy 6 months of food, then maybe yes, I would encourage you to panic. Whatever you need to do to get prepared for what could be coming down the road over the next 6 months. This is a very serious situation and one that should not be ignored. So what would the proper actions be without having to go through a GFC 2.0? Very, very easy. First and foremost, get rid of these insane sanctions against Russia. They're only hurting us, and they're not really hurting them. So why do them? I get it. From a political standpoint, you have to say that you're doing something. But if the only thing that you're doing is destroying the economy of Europe and the United States, it doesn't make any sense. The next thing you do is get rid of this crazy narrative that demonizes fossil fuels and there's refiners actually making profit. Yes, it would be great. And we need to think about transitioning to renewable energy. But we need to do it in a smart, prudent way, not one that is completely reactionary, haphazard, and puts us into this very compromising position that we're in now. The same compromising position that most of Europe put themselves in by weaning themselves off of nuclear energy, as a good example. So these problems can be addressed, but it requires us to acknowledge the fact there are no solutions, there are only alternatives, just like Dr. Thomas Sowell teaches us. Therefore, we have to sit down and use some critical thinking and just go through a cost-benefit analysis and then take some intelligent adult-type action. For more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments, check out this playlist right here, and I will see you on the next video.